radical forgiveness, and battling cancel culture. That and more coming up. Welcome to Newsmakers, a show where we go behind the headlines each week to bring you interviews with pastors, entertainers, politicians, and other notable news figures. On today's Newsmakers, we begin with an interview with Dr. Shafir Botner. He's an Israeli helicopter paramedic who saw firsthand the horror of Hamas's terror attack, and he joins us to share his experience and a warning to the West. Let's welcome him here to Newsmakers. Well, I appreciate you joining me today. Let's start with October 7th. We obviously are here at the one-year anniversary of that horrific event. What is going through your heart and your mind as you reflect on this past year and the fact that it's been 12 months? I mean, it's almost unbelievable.
Actually, yeah, that's unbelievable to think that we are a year from that horrific Saturday, October 7. It's been I don't know if crazy year is the right term. It's unbelievable year. I never even imagined that we will have such a year. The people who live in Israel, it's quite, I would say, normal to have crazy or intense life, but I have never imagined it will be a year of war. And unfortunately, we can't see the end. Of course, we are more optimistic these days from the day on October 7th, but we still cannot see the end. But we are optimistic.
Well, and being optimistic in light of all that's going on, obviously, as we're talking, there was just an attack by Iran, and there's a lot that's still, undecided on where that will go next and how Israel will fully respond to that. But we're not really here to talk about that as much as we are, and we can touch on that if you like. I really want to go back to October 7th because your experience, doing the job that you do, saving, helping, rescuing others. Take us through your morning that day. How did it start and what unfolded?
Well, it was my Saturday off. I was at home. And like the rest of the people in Israel, I woke up from the sirens that were being all over. I know it sounds strange, but from time to time, that's what's happening in Israel. The sirens with no any pre-notification. But on that morning, it felt different, because the sirens were all over, dozens of sirens in less than a minute. And to be honest, the first few moments, I thought it was false alarm. From time to time, I thought maybe it's a technical problem with the system and false alarms. But on my Mala app, my Magen David Adom organization, the national organization in Israel, we have an app. And I saw notification that injuries around Israel, about injuries. So I realized it's not a false alarm, and I realized that something big and different, unusual is happening. So I did what I used to do, every time it's happening. I put on my uniforms, went on my car towards the place they need me. I live in the south of Israel, so the natural place for me to go were in Beersheba, the big city, the capital city of the south of Israel. So I went over there. But in a very short time, I got a call that I'm needed at our helipad, the place that our helicopter is located. We have one helipad on the north of the country and one on the south. One part of my job in Magen David Adom is a Medivac paramedic, and I'm once a week I'm doing 24-hour shift. On a daily basis, I'm the manager of the paramedic school in Magen David Adom. So I went to the helipad, and we started operated another helicopter since even before noon. That was the first time I went on the helicopter on October 7th. Even, by the way, without knowing the real size of the event. We didn't realize what is happening around us. We know there are sirens, missiles, And that's the only knowledge I knew on the moment I went on the helicopter. I know there are many injuries, but I had no clue about what's happening in the kibbutzim and the small suburbs next to the Gaza Strip.
Before we go, if you had a critic in front of you, somebody who you could say, hey, I want to help you understand this, a critic who doesn't believe that Israel should be behaving in the way that they are, that Israel shouldn't be responding, what would you say to those people to help them understand?
Well, I think people will understand the best when the situation reach personally to them. Many people think about Israel as a small country. Perhaps it's important to them, perhaps not. A small country somewhere in the Middle East, many of them, the most popular saying to say for those who critic is from the river to the sea. And many people don't even know which river and which sea they are talking about. And what I can say to them, Israel is just on the front line in a bigger game, which are, the players in that game is the United States, China, Iran, and Russia. We are just a tiny piece that right now in the front line in a much bigger game, and you might be next. The people in Europe, the people in the States, regardless if they like or dislike Israel, if you will not stand next to us right now, you will be next. Look what's happening in Europe. The governments in Europe, the anti-Semitic waves in Europe, the growing of the radical Islamic groups in Europe, and even in the States. Look at the universities. Look what's happening now. You are going to be next. That's what you need to realize. You don't have to like us. You don't have to be a fan of Jewish or Israeli people. If you will not open your eyes and see the radical groups growing, you will be next. That's what I have to say to other people. You don't have to like me. Look on yourself.
Well, thank you. I so appreciate your time today. God bless you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, and thank you for having me.
Continue to pray for the peace of Israel and the Middle East during this contentious time. We'll be right back with more Newsmakers in just a moment. Welcome back to Newsmakers. Next up, the world was horrified when journalist James Foley was beheaded by ISIS in 2014. His mother, Diane, joins us to share her faith, her experience, and her path to peace. She also joins to talk about the work she's doing to help other hostage families. Let's welcome Diane to Newsmakers. I want to thank you for joining me. And before we get into any bits and pieces of the story, and I want to talk about the foundation, I want to talk about James. I want to talk about your son, Jim, first, and who he was. I think too often people get lost in the headlines and they don't get to actually hear who a person is. And so tell us a little bit about your son.
Sure. Jim was the oldest of our 5 children. Friendly, curious little boy, a voracious reader, wanted to be read to as soon as he could read. He just was always reading. Very good listener, too, even as a young kiddo. He liked to hear what other people's stories were. So when he finally found journalism, he really felt like he'd found his passion. He wanted to understand why people went to war, what happens to people in the midst of war, civilians, children, what are the effects? He truly loved it and was just kind of an intrepid sort of kiddo. He didn't need much in the way of things. He's just had interest in people.
When going back to 2012, when did you first realize that something was wrong, that Jim was in trouble?
Well, we realized rather acutely because he did not call on Thanksgiving 2012. And that Jim always called on holidays. He always was in touch. He was very good about that, always reassuring us he was fine and asking how we were. So when we did not hear from him that Thanksgiving, it was kind of an ominous silence. And it was the next morning when two of his colleagues called to tell us Jim had been kidnapped very near the border of Turkey when he was trying to come home. He was en route to meet these colleagues on the border.
You know, hearing that as a mother, when you first had that information come to you, what went through your heart and your mind?
Well, we just couldn't believe it had happened, because Jim had had a 6-week imprisonment in Libya when he had been held as a political prisoner when he was covering that. And that was in 2011, and he miraculously came home, and we thought that was kind of a fluke, that, you know, was rare. And so for it to happen again, it was like, it was a shock. And it was very different, because this kidnapping was only witnessed by his fixer, who couldn't figure out who the captors were. He just vanished for the next 9 months. Whereas the other kidnapping, it was witnessed by a New York Times reporter, and we knew where he was. So that was at least reassuring. This time we had no idea if he was dead or alive for the next 9 months. So it was horrible. It really was.
So let's talk about the James Foley Legacy Foundation. Let's talk about the work you're doing, because this is important. And you took that pain, you turned it into purpose. Talk a little bit about the programs, what you're doing, and how you hope to continue helping those families.
Well, Bill, you know, what's interesting, I think, as a parent, is sometimes we don't know what our children become. And Jim was always a loving son, but I never realized his really unique gifts that really came out amid his horrible imprisonment and torture. And a lot of that was brought out in Jim, the James Foley story. That was a friend of his that wanted people to know who he was as a person. So that film taught me a lot and helped me to see how our prayers and his prayers helped Jim to endure. So Jim just aspired to be a man of moral courage. He really felt really good journalism required a courage to report the truth, to look at all sides, and to try to, as best one could, to present that truth to readers, if you will. So when we started the foundation, we aspired to inspire ourselves and others to, including our government, including journalists, to also aspire to that kind of moral courage, to dare to do the right thing by prioritizing the return of innocent U.S. nationals who are targeted simply because they're U.S. nationals, and to make our policies help them to come home, and to also help journalists to know how to be safer, particularly if they were freelancers and aspiring journalists, like youngsters who aspire to be a journalist. How can they be as safe as possible while doing this important work? So those were our aspirations. And 10 years later, it's really miraculous how many good people stepped up to make things better, truly. I mean, we started the foundation within 3 weeks of Jim's murder. And by June of 2015, the President Obama ordered a total review of non-government review as well as government review. So that meant interviewing victims like myself, other families. What did the government do right? How did the government fail? And they set up our current U.S. hostage enterprise. So wow. That enterprise is what we now currently continue to engage with on a daily basis, really. We do research with hostage families and experts to find out what areas still need work. We need to work on deterrence, Billy. We obviously, don't want to incentivize any more of this. Thankfully, our research shows at present that has not happened. So we're grateful for that, but we need more research so that they stop using innocent people as political pawns, like they're using in Gaza right now, or like Russia and China are using at present. So we still have many challenges, but there has been much progress, Billy. And I'm very grateful to the many people who've made that happen.
You know, I'm very grateful to you for giving us this time today, sharing your journey. It's incredibly powerful, and I just appreciate you. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Billy. God bless you and all you do.
Find out more about Diane's incredible work at jamesfoleyfoundation.org. We'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. For our final segment, we're sitting down with Dr. Corey DeAngelis, a prominent education advocate who has been in the headlines over the past couple of weeks over negative press stories surrounding past revelations about his past, things that happened years ago that he has now been forced to respond to. He is going to join us to talk about that here on Newsmakers. Corey, you have had an intense couple of weeks here. You've been in the headlines over the past week in particular, and not necessarily for the education work that you do. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. But what has it been like to deal with the intensity of that?
Yeah, I mean, it was tough at first, but since I've been able to go public, it has been a huge turnaround. The public support from people on our side has been overwhelming, and it's been a great turnaround. But look, I put a public statement out there on X, formerly known as Twitter, just acknowledging what happened. Look, there are images and videos circulating of me from my college days about a decade ago that I'm not proud of. They're embarrassing. I'm nude in those videos and pictures. And, there has been a cancellation attempt from the left in particular and my political opponents trying to accuse me of hypocrisy. Their claims fall flat. There's a good article by Robbie Suave at Reason Magazine where he knocks down those accusations. But, look, I was kind of lured into this at a young age. I was an adult. I did make those decisions. I'm not proud of those decisions, but I can see how it can be deceptive, and the entire industry can be deceptive, especially for young people. I'm consistent. I don't want this kind of material to be in front of children in the K-12 education system before they are consenting adults. If I was able to be lured in to make bad decisions as a young adult in college, just imagine how much worse it could be for younger people. So I fought against this kind of material being included in the classroom. I've been consistent. I've changed my life. People change over time. And you can be consistent in supporting something for adults while vehemently opposing it for children. And Chris Rufo at the Manhattan Institute has been a huge supporter throughout this entire process. He has done 2 tweets in support of me. And he pointed out in his most recent one, quote, "Cancellation requires consent." Well, guess what? I do not consent to this smear campaign, mudslinging. It is something dug up from my past, something, again, I'm not proud of, and something that fuels my fire to keep this material away from children.
You know, there are a lot of parents maybe watching or listening to this, and, they may want to know what it was that kind of led you into it. What were the things that they need to be looking out for, maybe that they can, whether it's this issue or some other negative pathway, maybe the lies you believe, the things that maybe led you there, anything you can share on that might be helpful to those people as they watch younger people in their lives?
Yeah, I got into it thinking I was going to be a fitness model. I was really into working out at the time. I had friends who really liked working out at the time. That was kind of my passion. And there were inquiries about that. I got into some fitness modeling, but it turned into something that turned into the mistake that I made. And the industry that tried to pull me in was deceptive in that they said it was going to be one thing. It actually ended up being something else. And then once you're in it, it's even harder to get out. I did get out very quickly, But it becomes even more difficult when they try to get you to do things that are against your own nature by waving tons of money as a carrot in front of you to try to get you to do things that you would have never thought in your wildest imagination that you would even consider doing. So I would say, have a family that's close to you, have a sense of community that you can talk to these about these things with, and just, the more open you are with your community, the more likely you're going to go down the right path.
All right. So Corey, where do you want people to go if people want to get more information on your work, on what you're doing on the education front? Where can they go to do that?
You can follow me on Twitter, now X. It's at DeAngelis Corey. Hopefully Elon Musk will follow me after this episode too. He responded to my tweet. But you can also check out my book, The Parent Revolution, and we have a separate episode. You and I talked about this book in more detail. It's a national bestseller. It was endorsed by President Trump, and also on the back you can see Ted Cruz's endorsement. He says, you can ruin Randy Weingarten's day by reading this book. She's the head of the teachers union. I dedicated the book to her for overplaying her hand and inadvertently doing more to advance school choice and homeschooling, which is at an all-time high now, than anyone could have ever imagined. They messed up by fighting to keep the schools closed. They showed their true colors and showed parents what was happening in the classroom through remote learning, which we should have just called remotely learning. There wasn't a lot of learning going on, but families have woken up. They're never going back to sleep. And this parent revolution is going to continue. And so thank you, Billy, for having me. And I look forward to chatting with you more via text, and hopefully we can do another one of these episodes soon.
Continue to pray for Corey DeAngelis as he starts to explore faith in the wake of this story. We'll be right back in just a moment with more Newsmakers on the CBN News Channel. That's all for Newsmakers. Thank you for watching, and be sure to head on over to the CBN News YouTube channel. That's where you'll have a chance to watch the full interviews that you saw on today's episode. Plus, you can check out our daily Newsmakers podcast. We feature one full interview every single day. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. As for this show, we'll see you again next week.